The flames in the window of Tucumcari's finest hotel cast an eerie orange glow across the darkening New Mexico sky as Weston Irwin raced his horse down the dusty main street, the screams of a trapped woman piercing through the chaos of the burning building. Tucumcari, New Mexico Territory, 1879. The small frontier town of Tucumcari was experiencing its first real prosperity since the railroad had pushed through 6 months prior. What had once been little more than a dusty outpost with a few struggling businesses had transformed into a bustling center of commerce along the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway. New buildings had sprung up practically overnight: saloons, hotels, mercantiles, and even a proper telegraph office that kept the town connected to the wider world. Weston Irwin had arrived with the railroad, though not on it. He'd followed the construction crews west from Kansas, driving cattle to feed the hungry workers. When the line reached Tucumcari, something about the scrappy little town nestled beneath the prominent mesa had spoken to him. While other cowboys continued westward, Weston decided to stay, purchasing a modest spread 10 miles outside town. At 32, Weston had spent most of his adult life in the saddle, moving from one cattle outfit to another across Texas, Kansas, and now New Mexico Territory. His dark hair was perpetually sun-bleached at the ends, his face weathered by years under the open sky, and his eyes a clear blue that surprised many who expected the typical brown of most cowboys, reflected both kindness and caution. He wasn't a man given to wild displays or unnecessary conversation, but those who knew him respected both his work ethic and steady hand. On this particular evening, Weston had come to town to purchase supplies and perhaps enjoy one quiet drink at the Silver Dollar before heading back to his ranch. Tucumcari was growing, but it wasn't yet large enough to require more than a day's visit to handle all necessary business. He had just finished loading his wagon when the commotion began down the street. Fire! Fire at the Sunshine Hotel. The shout came from a young boy racing down the street, his face flushed with excitement and fear. Weston's head snapped up, and he could see it now, smoke billowing from the second story of the town's newest establishment, a 3-story hotel that had opened just last month to much fanfare. Without hesitation, Weston secured his wagon and sprinted toward the growing crowd gathering in front of the hotel. The Sunshine had been the pride of Tucumcari, a symbol of the town's growing importance. Built of wood with elegant trim painted in cheerful yellow, it had quickly become the preferred lodging for travelers with means. Now, angry orange flames licked at the windows of the second floor, and black smoke poured from beneath the eaves. A bucket brigade had already formed, with townspeople passing water from the nearby horse trough, but the fire was growing faster than they could combat it. Sheriff Patterson was directing people away from the building. "Everyone back. Get those horses clear of the street. Is anyone still inside?" Weston asked, grabbing the sheriff's arm. "Think we got most everyone out," Patterson replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "Manager says all guests are accounted for except..." A scream cut through the air, causing everyone to look up. In a second-floor window, partially obscured by smoke, the figure of a woman appeared, beating frantically at the glass. "Miss Scarlett," gasped the hotel manager, who stood wringing his hands nearby. "I thought she'd gone out earlier. She must have returned without my knowledge." Weston stared up at the trapped woman. "Who is she?" "Miss Theodora Scarlett. Just arrived from Boston last week. She's been staying in room 12 while arranging to open a millinery shop." Another scream pierced the evening air as flames appeared in the window beside the one where the woman stood. The fire was spreading rapidly. "We need a ladder," someone shouted. "The town ladder is too short," the blacksmith called back. Won't reach the second floor. Weston looked around desperately, assessing the situation. The main entrance was already engulfed in flames, cutting off any approach from below. The woman Miss Scarlett appeared again at the window, coughing violently before disappearing back into the room. Without fully considering the consequences, Weston stripped off his coat and sprinted toward the alley beside the hotel. If he couldn't go in from the front, he'd find another way. "Irwin, have you lost your mind?" Sheriff Patterson shouted after him. The narrow passage between the hotel and the adjacent hardware store offered little room to maneuver, but Weston spotted what he needed: a stack of empty crates behind the store. Dragging them beneath a first-floor window of the hotel that wasn't yet burning, he created a makeshift platform. The window was locked, but Weston didn't hesitate. Wrapping his bandana around his fist, he smashed the glass and cleared the frame before hoisting himself inside. He landed in what appeared to be a small office, mercifully free of fire though hazy with smoke. The heat hit him immediately, an oppressive wall that made breathing difficult. Dropping to his knees where the air was marginally clearer, he crawled toward the door. The hallway beyond was partially engulfed, flames climbing the wooden wainscoting and licking at the ceiling. Weston pulled his bandana up over his nose and mouth, squinting through the smoke. "Miss Scarlett," he shouted. "Where are you?" A faint coughing from above told him he needed to find the stairs. Staying low, he moved along the wall until he reached the main staircase. The bottom steps were already burning, but there appeared to be a path up the right side. Taking a deep breath through his bandana, Weston made a dash for it, taking the stairs two at a time. The wood groaned ominously beneath his boots, and he could feel the heat intensifying with each step. At the landing, he paused, disoriented by the thick smoke that filled the second-floor corridor. "Help!" The cry came from his left. "Please, someone help!" Following the voice, Weston counted doors. The manager had said room 12. He passed rooms 8, 9, 10, 11, the heat growing more intense with each step. When he reached the door marked 12, he found it locked. "Miss Scarlett, stand back from the door," a muffled response came through the wood. Taking several steps back, Weston lowered his shoulder and charged. The door splintered on the first attempt but didn't give way entirely. A second charge sent it crashing inward. The room was filled with smoke, but less flame than the hallway. Near the window stood a young woman, her face smudged with soot, her eyes wide with terror. She wore a simple blue dress, now stained with ash, and clutched a small leather case to her chest. "Come quickly," Weston said, extending his hand. "The stairs won't hold much longer." She stared at him, seemingly frozen in place. Who are you?" "Weston Irwin. I've got a ranch outside town." He took a step toward her. "The building's coming down around us, Miss Scarlett. We need to go now." She nodded, still clutching her case. "I couldn't leave without this. It's all I have left of my mother." A loud crack from the hallway emphasized the urgency of their situation. Weston reached for her hand, and she finally took it, her fingers cold despite the heat surrounding them. Leading her to the door, Weston peered into the corridor. In the brief minutes he'd spent reaching her, the fire had spread dramatically. The path to the stairs was now completely blocked by flames. "We're trapped," Theodora whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the fire. Weston pulled her back into the room and shut the door against the smoke. "The window," he said. "It's our only chance." Theodora shook her head frantically. "It's too high. We'll be killed in the fall. We'll die for certain if we stay." Weston moved to the window and pushed it fully open. Below, the crowd had grown, and several men held what appeared to be blankets stretched between them. "We can jump." He called back to her. "They'll catch us." A portion of the ceiling crashed down in the corridor, the noise making Theodora jump. She looked at the window, then back at the door, which was beginning to smoke around the edges. "I can't," she whispered. "I've never been brave." Weston crossed back to her in 2 long strides. "Miss Scarlett, I'm not leaving you here. We're going together." He glanced around the room, spying a water pitcher on the dresser. Grabbing it, he doused his bandana and handed it to her. "Put this over your mouth and nose." She did as instructed, her hands trembling. "Now, let's try something else," he said, moving to the window again. Looking out, he could see that the fire had not yet reached the exterior wall beneath the window. There was a narrow ledge that ran along the front of the building, connecting to the adjacent hardware store roof. "We can climb across," he told her, pointing to the ledge. "If we can reach the next building, we can get down from there." Theodora stared at the narrow ledge, then back at him, her eyes wide with fear. "I can't do that. I just can't." Another section of ceiling groaned ominously. They were running out of time. "Miss Scarlett," Weston said firmly, "I understand your fear. But right now, that fear is the only thing standing between us and survival. I promise I won't let you fall." She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. Something in his steady gaze seemed to reach her. "I need you to trust me," he said softly. "Can you do that?" After what seemed like an eternity, she nodded. "Yes." "Good." Weston moved to the window. "I'll go first, then help you across." He climbed onto the sill and carefully swung his legs outside. The ledge was narrower than he'd hoped, barely 6 inches wide. Moving slowly, he edged along it, keeping his back pressed against the wall. When he'd gone about 5 feet, he reached back for her. "Your turn. Hand me your case first." Theodora hesitated briefly before passing her precious leather case to him. He tucked it securely under one arm. "Now come to the window," he instructed. "Sit on the sill like I did." The room behind her was rapidly filling with smoke as the fire ate through the door. With shaking hands, Theodora climbed onto the windowsill. "Now put one foot on the ledge," Weston said calmly, as if they were simply crossing a shallow creek rather than standing 2 stories above a hard-packed dirt street with a burning building at their backs. "Good. Now the other foot." She followed his instructions, her entire body trembling. "Now turn so your back is against the wall and take my hand." She reached for him, her fingers cold despite the heat. As she stood fully on the ledge, a gust of wind caught her skirt, causing her to wobble. "I can't," she cried, pressing herself against the wall. "You can," Weston assured her. "Just look at me, not down. Take my hand and slide 1 foot at a time." Below, the crowd had noticed their escape attempt. A hush fell over them as they watched the precarious rescue unfolding above. "1 step," Weston encouraged. "That's it." Another. Inch by agonizing inch, they made their way along the ledge. When they were halfway to the hardware store roof, a window below them shattered from the heat and flames licked upward. Theodora gasped and froze. "Keep moving," Weston urged. "We're almost there." Just as they reached the edge of the hardware store roof, a loud crack sounded from the hotel. The entire structure seemed to shift, and the ledge beneath Theodora's feet began to crumble. She screamed as she started to fall, but Weston's grip on her hand remained firm. With a strength born of desperation, he pulled her toward him, swinging her onto the flat roof of the hardware store as the section of ledge they'd been standing on collapsed entirely. They landed in a heap on the tar paper roof, both gasping for breath. For a moment, they simply lay there, the leather case still clutched under Weston's arm, as the Sunshine Hotel groaned and shifted behind them. "You saved my life," Theodora finally whispered, looking at him with wide, soot-smudged eyes. Before Weston could respond, a cheer erupted from the street below. Looking over the edge of the roof, they could see the crowd applauding their escape. "There's a ladder at the back of the building," Weston said, getting to his feet and helping Theodora up. "Can you walk?" She nodded, though she swayed slightly. "I think so." He kept a steadying hand on her elbow as they crossed the roof to where a ladder led down to the alley. As Weston helped her onto the ladder, the Sunshine Hotel gave a final, massive groan. They turned in time to see the entire front wall collapse inward, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. "We made it just in time," Theodora said, her voice breaking. "Yes, madam, we did," Weston agreed, handing her the leather case before following her down the ladder. When they reached the ground, Dr. Franklin, the town physician, was waiting for them. "Let me check you both," he insisted, guiding them away from the burning building to his office across the street. As the doctor examined them for burns and smoke inhalation, Sheriff Patterson arrived to take their statements. Through it all, Theodora kept glancing at Weston with a mixture of gratitude and something else he couldn't quite identify. When they were finally left alone in the doctor's waiting room, Theodora clasped Weston's hand. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Irwin. You risked your life for a complete stranger." Weston, uncomfortable with praise, shrugged. "Couldn't rightly leave you up there, Miss Scarlett." "Theodora," she corrected softly. "Please call me Theodora." "Theodora," he repeated, the name feeling strangely right on his tongue. "I'm Weston." She smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her soot-stained face. "It seems I've lost everything except what's in this case," she said, gesturing to the leather satchel. "All my plans for the millinery shop gone in the fire." "Where will you stay tonight?" Weston asked, suddenly realizing her predicament. I don't know," she admitted. "I suppose the boarding house, if they have a room." The door opened and Mayor Wilkins entered, his round face creased with concern. "Miss Scarlett, Mr. Irwin, the whole town is talking about your remarkable escape. How are you feeling?" "We're fine, thanks to Mr. Irwin," Theodora replied. "The town owes you a debt of gratitude, son," the mayor said, clapping Weston on the shoulder. "Now, Miss Scarlett, about your accommodations, Mrs. Wilkins and I would be honored if you would stay with us until you get back on your feet." Theodora's eyes filled with tears. "That's very kind, Mayor Wilkins. Thank you." "Not at all, my dear. It's the least we can do." The mayor turned to Weston. "And you, Mr. Irwin, you need a place for the night. Your wagon and horses are safe at the livery." Weston shook his head. "Thank you, but I should be getting back to my ranch. I have livestock to tend to." As the mayor left to make arrangements, Theodora turned to Weston. "Will I see you again?" Something in her voice made Weston's heart quicken. "I come to town most Saturdays for supplies." "Perhaps we could meet for coffee at the cafe." Her smile returned, brighter this time. "I'd like that very much." As they parted that evening, neither could have predicted how that chance meeting, forged in fire and desperation, would change both their lives forever. Weston returned to his ranch that night, his mind filled with images of the fire and of Theodora Scarlett's face as he'd pulled her to safety. He'd never considered himself a hero, just a man who did what needed doing. But the way she had looked at him, with those deep green eyes filled with gratitude and something more, had stirred something long dormant within him. The following days passed in a blur of routine ranch work, but Weston found his thoughts continually drifting back to the woman he'd rescued. By the time Saturday arrived, he found himself taking extra care with his appearance before heading into town. Tucumcari was still abuzz with talk of the hotel fire. As Weston tied his horse outside the general store, several people stopped to clap him on the back or shake his hand. "There he is, the hero of Tucumcari," called out Tom Jenkins from the barbershop doorway. Weston tipped his hat but said nothing, uncomfortable with the attention. He quickly completed his errands before making his way to Clara's cafe, his heart beating a little faster than usual. Through the window, he could see Theodora already seated at a table. She wore a simple green dress that complemented her auburn hair, which was pinned up neatly beneath a modest hat. She looked nothing like the soot-covered, terrified woman he'd pulled from the burning hotel, yet he would have recognized her anywhere. As he entered, she looked up and her face brightened. "Weston," she said, rising slightly from her chair. "I was beginning to worry you wouldn't come." "Sorry to keep you waiting," he replied, removing his hat and taking the seat across from her. "Had a few more errands than expected." Clara herself bustled over with coffee. "On the house for Tucumcari's heroes," she announced, beaming at them both. When they were alone again, Theodora leaned forward. "I still can't thank you enough for what you did." Weston shook his head. "No need to keep thanking me. Anyone would have done the same. But they didn't. You did." She touched his hand briefly. "The mayor told me you've lived here less than a year." "That's right. Came with the railroad, stayed for the land." Weston took a sip of coffee, gathering his thoughts. "What about you? What brings a Boston lady to Tucumcari?" Theodora's expression grew contemplative. "A fresh start. After my parents passed away last year, there was nothing keeping me in Boston. I'd read about opportunities in the West for women willing to establish businesses in growing communities." "A millinery shop," the hotel manager said. She nodded. "Yes. I was trained by one of Boston's finest milliners. I thought Tucumcari, with the new railroad bringing in passengers and growth, would be perfect." Her expression fell slightly. "Though now, with all my inventory and most of my savings gone in the fire, what will you do?" Theodora straightened her shoulders. "Start again. Mayor Wilkins has offered me a small space in the building he owns on Center Street, rent-free for the first 3 months. Mrs. Henderson at the general store has agreed to let me order through her supplier account until I can establish my own. I still have my mother's sewing machine and her design journals in my case, so I can begin making hats right away." Weston was impressed by her determination. "Sounds like you've got it all figured out." "Hardly," she laughed softly, "but I've never been one to give up easily. My father always said I had more stubbornness than sense." They talked for nearly 2 hours, the coffee growing cold as they shared stories of their lives. Theodora told him about growing up in Boston, the daughter of a university professor and a mother who had once designed hats for the city's elite. Weston spoke of his years driving cattle across the plains, of the solitude he'd come to appreciate, and of his small ranch where he was slowly building a respectable herd. "Would you like to see it sometime?" he asked impulsively. "My ranch, I mean." Theodora's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded. "I would like that very much." As they parted that day, something had changed between them, a connection formed not just through the drama of their first meeting, but through genuine interest and respect. Over the next several weeks, Weston found himself in town more frequently than his ranch work strictly required. He helped Theodora set up her shop, building shelves and a display counter from lumber he salvaged from his own supplies. She, in turn, accepted his invitation to visit his ranch, arriving one Sunday afternoon in a borrowed buggy. Weston's ranch was modest by territorial standards, a small but well-built cabin, a sturdy barn, and a corral where he broke horses for additional income. But his pride in the place was evident as he showed Theodora around. "It's not much to look at yet," he admitted as they stood on the porch, looking out over the land that stretched toward the mesa. "But in a few years, once the herd grows—" "It's wonderful," Theodora said sincerely. "You've built all this yourself?" Weston nodded. "Every nail and board. Had some help with the barn raising from neighbors, but the rest is my own doing. You should be proud." She turned to him, the setting sun casting a golden glow across her face. It takes courage to strike out on your own like this, says the woman who traveled halfway across the country to start a business in a town where she knew no one. Weston replied with a smile. Perhaps we're both a bit brave then, she said softly. As spring turned to summer, their friendship deepened. Theodora's shop, Scarlett Creations, opened to considerable interest from the women of Tucumcari and surrounding ranches. Her designs, which combined Eastern refinement with practical adaptations for Western life, quickly gained a following. Weston found himself looking forward to their Saturday meetings with an eagerness that both surprised and somewhat alarmed him. It had been many years since he'd allowed himself to care deeply for anyone. The life of a cowboy was nomadic and lonely by nature, and he'd accepted that solitude as the price of his independence. Yet now, as he watched Theodora flourish in her new life, he began to question whether independence and happiness were necessarily the same thing. One warm evening in late July, Weston drove Theodora home after a town social. As they sat in his wagon outside the Wilkins home, the night air heavy with the scent of summer blooms, a comfortable silence fell between them. "Theodora," he finally said, her name still feeling like a privilege on his tongue. "I'm not much good at pretty words or grand gestures, but I want you to know that meeting you even in those circumstances has been the best thing that's happened to me in a long while." She turned to him, her face softly illuminated by the moonlight. "It's been the best thing for me too, Weston." Without overthinking it, he leaned forward and gently kissed her. When he pulled back, her eyes remained closed for a moment, a small smile playing at her lips. "I should go in," she whispered, though she made no move to leave. "You should," he agreed, equally still. Their second kiss was less hesitant, a confirmation of feelings that had been growing steadily since that first desperate meeting in the burning hotel. As summer progressed into fall, their courtship became the subject of good-natured gossip throughout Tucumcari. The heroic cowboy and the resourceful Eastern milliner made a striking pair, and few were surprised when Weston began building an addition to his cabin, a larger bedroom, and a proper sitting room in October. "Are you planning to ask her soon?" Tom Jenkins inquired one afternoon as Weston purchased nails at the hardware store. "Thinking on it," Weston admitted, "but I want everything to be right first." What Weston didn't share was his deeper concern. He'd fallen deeply in love with Theodora, but he worried that life as a rancher's wife might prove too difficult for a woman accustomed to city comforts. Despite her determination and adaptability, there was no denying that life on a frontier ranch was harsh, especially for a woman. His opportunity to discover the truth came sooner than expected. In early November, an early blizzard swept through the territory, leaving Tucumcari isolated for nearly a week. When the roads finally cleared enough for travel, Weston made his way to town, concerned for Theodora's welfare. He found her shop open, though empty of customers. She looked up as the bell above the door jingled, and her face lit with relief and joy. "Weston," she rushed to him, embracing him tightly. "I've been so worried. The ranch is much more exposed than town." "We weathered it fine," he assured her. "Lost 2 calves, but the rest of the stock came through. How about you? Were you comfortable at the Wilkins?" Theodora hesitated, then gestured for him to follow her into the back room of the shop. There, he was surprised to see a small cot set up beside the stove. "You stayed here?" "During the blizzard?" he asked incredulously. She nodded. "The Wilkins house is crowded with their children and Mrs. Wilkins' sister visiting from St. Louis. I've been staying here most nights now." She smiled ruefully. "It's not very warm, but it's mine." Weston looked around the small space, noting the careful organization of her meager belongings. The neat stack of design sketches beside her mother's sewing machine, the single tin cup and plate, beside a tiny wash basin. "Theodora," he said slowly, "you're living like this, but you never said a word." She lifted her chin slightly. "I'm managing just fine. My business is growing, and by spring I should be able to afford proper rooms." Weston shook his head in wonder. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known." "Hardly," she laughed. "I nearly fell apart when that fire trapped me. But you didn't. You trusted me and found your courage." He took her hands in his. "I've been holding back, thinking you might find ranch life too difficult after Boston, but seeing how you've faced every challenge here." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "Theodora Scarlett, I love you. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. "Yes, Weston. Yes." Their wedding took place on Christmas Eve in Tucumcari's small church, decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons for the holiday. Mayor Wilkins gave the bride away, and it seemed the entire town turned out to witness the union of the heroic cowboy and the milliner he'd rescued from the flames. As they drove back to the ranch that evening, snow began to fall gently around them. Theodora, wrapped in a new fur-lined cloak, a wedding gift from the townspeople, leaned against Weston's shoulder. "Are you happy?" he asked, still scarcely believing she had chosen to share his life. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she replied, tilting her face up for a kiss as snowflakes melted on her cheeks. Their first year of marriage brought both joy and challenges. Theodora continued to run her shop 3 days a week, with Weston driving her to town and picking her up in the evening. On the ranch, she learned to manage a household with limited resources, to preserve food for winter, and to handle the accounts with the skill she developed running her own business. In turn, Weston found that sharing his life and work brought unexpected pleasures. The cabin, once merely a place to sleep between days of work, became a home filled with the small touches. Theodora brought curtains at the windows, a colorful quilt on their bed, the scent of bread baking in the oven. Spring brought calving season and the first real test of their partnership. When a late blizzard threatened the newborn calves, they worked side by side through the night, bringing the most vulnerable into the barn. Theodora, despite having never been around livestock before moving west, showed a natural gentleness that even the most skittish animals responded to. As they finally fell into bed at dawn, exhausted but satisfied that they'd saved most of the calves, Weston pulled her close. "You're a natural rancher's wife," he murmured against her hair. "And you," she replied sleepily, "are a natural husband. I can't imagine my life without you, Weston." Their happiness seemed complete when, in late summer, Theodora discovered she was expecting their first child. The news was met with joy not only by the couple but by the entire town. Where Theodora's shop had become a gathering place for women and her designs were now sought after by customers as far away as Santa Fe. Yet even as they prepared for this new chapter in their lives, neither forgot the circumstances that had brought them together. The site where the Sunshine Hotel had stood remained vacant, a stark reminder of the fire that had nearly claimed Theodora's life. In October, as Theodora's pregnancy began to show, Mayor Wilkins called a town meeting to discuss the empty lot. "It's been more than a year," he announced. "It's time we built something new there, something that will serve the community." Various proposals were put forward: a new hotel, a school, a community hall. When it was Theodora's turn to speak, she rose carefully, one hand resting on her growing belly. "I believe we should build a proper firehouse," she said clearly. "With equipment that could have prevented the Sunshine Hotel fire from spreading so quickly. I would like to donate the proceeds from a special collection of hats I'm designing to help fund it." Her suggestion was met with enthusiastic approval, and by the time winter arrived, Construction on Tucumcari's first dedicated firehouse was well underway. As Christmas approached again, marking their first anniversary, Weston put the finishing touches on his special gift for Theodora, a cradle he'd carved from pine, with intricate designs of wildflowers around the edges. "It's beautiful," she breathed when he presented it to her on Christmas morning. "Our child will love it." "Speaking of our child," Weston said, placing his hand on her rounded belly, "have you thought more about names?" Theodora smiled. "If it's a boy, I'd like to name him after you. Weston James Irwin, Jr. And if it's a girl, Lillian," she said softly, "after my mother." Weston nodded, pulling her close. "Perfect." As they sat together before the fire, watching snow fall outside their window, Weston reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. Had he arrived in town a day later, had he not heard the cry for help, had he chosen a different path to the burning hotel, any small change might have meant never knowing Theodora, never experiencing the profound joy he felt now. "What are you thinking about?" Theodora asked, noticing his contemplative expression. "About fire," he said honestly. "How something so destructive brought us the greatest blessing of our lives." She nodded in understanding. "From the ashes of what I lost came everything I never knew I wanted," she said, squeezing his hand. "That night, I thought I was facing the end. Instead, it was just the beginning." Their son, Weston James Irwin, Jr., was born in early February during another snowstorm. Dr. Franklin barely made it to the ranch in time, arriving on horseback through drifts that would have stopped a wagon. The birth was difficult but uncomplicated, and when Weston finally held his son, a robust boy with a shock of dark hair and his mother's green eyes, he felt a love even more overwhelming than what he'd discovered with Theodora. "He's perfect," Weston whispered, carefully placing the swaddled infant in Theodora's arms. "Just like his mother." Life settled into a new rhythm with young James as they called him to avoid confusion at the center of their world. Theodora reduced her time at the shop to 1 day a week, taking the baby with her. The women of Tucumcari delighted in watching the milliner work with her son nearby, often taking turns holding him so Theodora could use both hands for her creations. By the time James turned 1, the ranch had prospered enough that Weston was able to hire a part-time hand, giving him more time to help with the expanding garden Theodora had planted and to work on further improvements to their home. Together, they added a proper dining room and a small nursery adjacent to their bedroom. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm dreaming all this," Theodora said one evening as they sat on their porch, watching James toddle unsteadily after a butterfly. "That night in the hotel, I truly believed I was going to die, and now look at everything we have." Weston pulled her close. "Not a dream, just a life we've built together, one day at a time." The summer James turned 2, Theodora announced she was expecting again. This pregnancy proved easier than the first, and in January, they welcomed a daughter, Lillian Rose Irwin, named for both their mothers. With 2 small children and a growing ranch to manage, they fell into a partnership that played to both their strengths. Weston handled the livestock and most of the physical labor, while Theodora managed the household, the children, and continued her millinery business on a limited basis. They shared the gardening, the accounts, and the endless decisions required to run a successful ranch. By the time James was 5 and Lillian 3, the Irwin Ranch had become one of the most respected in the county. Weston's careful breeding program had produced a herd known for its hardiness and quality, while Theodora's business acumen had helped them invest profits wisely, purchasing additional grazing land and improving their water systems. In town, the fire that had brought them together remained a defining moment in Tucumcari's history. The firehouse built with Theodora's fundraising efforts had already proven its worth, stopping several potential disasters before they could spread. A plaque near the entrance commemorated the Sunshine Hotel fire and listed Weston's name as the hero who had risked his life to save another. "Papa, tell us the story again," James would often request at bedtime. "About how you saved Mama from the fire." And Weston would recount the tale, always emphasizing that it was Theodora's courage that had saved them both. "Your Mama was the brave one," he would say. "She had to trust a complete stranger and do things that terrified her. But I only found my courage because you showed me the way," Theodora would add, sitting on the edge of Lillian's bed. "Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is trust someone else." As the years passed, their love deepened through shared joys and sorrows. They weathered droughts that threatened the ranch, illnesses that kept them up through long nights with sick children, and the everyday challenges of frontier life. Through it all, they remained each other's strength and comfort. When James was 10 and Lillian 8, Theodora gave birth to their third child, another son they named Thomas, after Theodora's father. The following spring, they made the difficult decision to close her shop permanently. The demands of the ranch and 3 children had finally made it impractical to maintain even her limited schedule in town. "Are you sad about it?" Weston asked as they packed up the last of her supplies. Theodora considered the question seriously. "A little," she admitted. "This shop was my first achievement here, my way of proving I could make my own way." She looked around the small space that had once been her entire world. "But I'm not the same woman who opened this shop. I've found something far more valuable than independence." "What's that?" She smiled, taking his hand. "Partnership. A life shared with someone who sees all of me and loves me anyway." As they drove back to the ranch that day, Theodora leaned against Weston's shoulder just as she had on their wedding day. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if there hadn't been a fire that night?" Weston considered the question. "I'd like to think we would have found each other anyway. Maybe I would have come into your shop for a hat." Theodora laughed. "You never wore a hat that wasn't purely functional in your life." "I might have, for the right motivation." He smiled down at her. "Truth is, I'm grateful for that fire, terrible as it was. It brought me the greatest blessing of my life, you." That evening, as they watched their children play in the yard, James teaching Thomas to throw a lasso, while Lillian supervised with all the authority of an older sister, Weston reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a desperate rescue on a burning ledge to a life built on mutual respect and deep love, they had forged something precious and enduring. The fire that had threatened to end Theodora's life had instead ignited a love that would sustain them both through all the years to come. "What are you thinking about?" Theodora asked, noticing his thoughtful expression. "About how sometimes the most unexpected moments lead us exactly where we need to be," he replied, drawing her close. "And how finding you in that fire was the beginning of everything good in my life." As the sun set over the mesa, casting long shadows across their land, Weston and Theodora Irwin sat together on the porch of the home they had built, surrounded by the family they had created, secure in a love born from danger but sustained by choice each and every day. In the decades that followed, the story of the cowboy who climbed through flames to rescue the woman who would become his wife became part of Tucumcari's folklore. Each retelling added new details until the tale grew almost mythic in proportion. Some versions had Weston carrying Theodora through walls of flame. Others claimed he jumped from the burning building with her in his arms. The truth, as Theodora and Weston knew it, was both simpler and more profound. A man had done what needed doing. A woman had found courage she didn't know she possessed. and together they had built a life from the ashes of what might have been tragedy. As their children grew, each found their own path. James inherited his father's love of the land and his mother's head for business, eventually taking over management of the ranch when Weston's knees could no longer handle the daily rigors of ranching. Lillian showed her mother's creativity and eye for design, studying art in Denver before returning to New Mexico to open a successful dress shop in Santa Fe. Thomas, their youngest, surprised everyone by pursuing medicine after a childhood injury sparked his interest in healing. When grandchildren began arriving, Weston and Theodora built a smaller house on the ranch property, turning the main house over to James and his wife. From their new home, they could watch the ranch continue to thrive under a new generation's care while enjoying a well-earned rest from decades of hard work. On the 50th anniversary of the Sunshine Hotel fire, the town of Tucumcari held a special commemoration. Though many of the original witnesses had passed on, the story remained an important part of the town's history. Mayor Patterson, the son of the sheriff who had been present that night, unveiled a new bronze plaque at the firehouse, which now housed a modern fire engine and trained volunteers. 50 years ago today, he announced to the gathered crowd, a tragedy was averted by the courage of one man and the determination of one woman. The Sunshine Hotel fire could have claimed lives, but instead, it became the beginning of a love story that has inspired our community for half a century. Weston, now in his 80s with white hair and hands gnarled from years of ranch work, sat beside Theodora, whose auburn hair had long since turned silver though her green eyes remained as bright and keen as ever. Surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even 3 great-grandchildren, they listened as the mayor recounted the events of that night. "Mr. and Mrs. Irwin," the mayor concluded, "would you do us the honor of saying a few words?" Theodora looked at Weston, who nodded and slowly rose to his feet. Though his voice had grown softer with age, it carried clearly in the hushed square. "Folks make much of what I did that night," he said simply. "But the truth is, I just did what any decent man would do when another person was in danger. The real courage was Theodora's trusting a stranger, crossing that ledge when she was terrified of heights." He looked down at his wife with the same tenderness he'd shown for 50 years. "Everything good in my life came from that night, not because of what I did, but because of who she is." Theodora rose to stand beside him, taking his weathered hand in hers. "The fire took everything I thought I needed," she added. "My plans, my inventory, my savings. But it gave me everything I truly needed: a partner, a family, a home." She looked out at the faces of her descendants. "The fire wasn't the end of my story, it was the beginning." Later that evening, as they sat on the porch of their small house watching the sunset paint the mesa in shades of gold and crimson, Weston put his arm around Theodora's shoulders. 50 years, he said softly. "Hard to believe so much time has passed." She nestled against him, as comfortable in his embrace as she had been on their wedding day. "And yet, in some ways, it seems like only yesterday you were climbing through that window to save me." Weston chuckled. "My knees certainly remember it wasn't yesterday. Couldn't do that climb now if my life depended on it." "You wouldn't need to," Theodora said, smiling up at him. "I'd be the one saving you these days." He laughed, knowing it was true. Over the years, she had saved him in countless ways, nursing him through injuries, supporting him through droughts and hard times, being his strength when doubt or grief threatened to overwhelm him. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared above the mesa, Weston thought about the long journey they had shared. From that desperate night on a burning ledge to this peaceful evening surrounded by the legacy they had built together. Every step had been worth taking. "I love you, Theodora Irwin," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "More today than I did when I pulled you from that fire, and that's saying something." "And I love you," she replied, her voice as clear and true as it had been when she first said those words to him. "More than I ever thought possible." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had faced danger, hard work, joy and sorrow together and emerged stronger for it all. The fire that had threatened to consume everything had instead forged a bond that neither time nor hardship could weaken. As the night deepened around them, they remained together on the porch, their hands intertwined just as their lives had been for half a century. From disaster had come their greatest blessing each other, and neither would have changed a single moment of the journey that had brought them to this peaceful night beneath the New Mexico stars. And there they remained, Weston and Theodora Irwin, a living testament to the truth that sometimes, from the ashes of our greatest fears, arise the most beautiful beginnings. Their story, which began in flames and desperation, continued in love and contentment, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, hope and new beginnings may be waiting just beyond the fire.